Let us now look into a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is the state of Texas. You see, little backstory here about me personally. Uh, my lineage on my father's side, for me in particular, goes back many, many generations in what is today Texas. I personally, on my father's side, am ninth generation Texan. Ninth generation Texan. I'm going to say that again. Okay. Various different genealogical studies in my family's background, especially pertaining to my father's side, have former Spanish colonists, uh, as Texas was once a former Spanish colony as a part of Nueva España, where Texas and Mexico were considered one entity. Um, my ancestors are former Spanish settlers. I'm descended from a very long line of former Spanish colonists who settled in what is present day Zapata County, Texas, back around the 1750s. So, since then, obviously, the generations have passed on. I am ninth generation Texan on my father's side. I take an immense amount of pride in that. Um, my lineage is unquestionably from Texas. I was born in Texas. I went to college in Texas. Moved my professional life elsewhere in Texas, but still in Texas nonetheless. I'm still in Texas. Lord willing, I will always be in Texas. I sure hope I am. I will visit many places across the world, across the country, and elsewhere. I have great reverence for many other places as well, but I will always want to call Texas my home. That's what my lineage would dictate. I'm very proud of that. That said, my family has seen quite a number of changes in what is present day Texas since the time of the 1750s. As I mentioned, and of course, as previously mentioned in earlier aspects of History 1301, what is now Texas used to be a part of the former Spanish colonial empire, most specifically Nueva España, which comprises modern day Mexico, Texas, and the rest of the American Southwest. Spain had other territories, Nueva Granada, and other places across South America and the Caribbean, also in the Philippines. But generally speaking, Nueva España specifically means Mexico, Texas, and the American Southwest. Um, in 1811, Father Miguel Hidalgo began a revolution. Long story short, many of the different American born Spaniards, criollos, if you will, of which there are a number in my family, um, declared independence from Spain to establish Mexico. And over the course of 10 years, Mexico would fight a war for independence from their colonial oppressor, the Spaniards. And eventually, they would oust the Spaniards and win their independence. And they did so largely in America's image. As I have mentioned previously, the American Revolution served as a wonderful example of what's possible when former colonial societies and areas declare independence from their European oppressor. They can formulate their own. They can start from the ground up. They can form new forms of government that create various different equalities based upon their individual situations. And of course, in the United States, we established a form of government that had never been tried before, that attempted a true form of balance, that checked and balanced all different types of government to reduce tyranny, to reduce oversight, to eliminate the idea of a monarchy. We truly wanted to have a free and equal society, as long as you're a white male. But that's another story. Otherwise, though, Mexico wanted that very same. They even officially named themselves in their Constitution of 1824 Estados Unidos Mexicanos, United Mexican States, Mexico. We call them Mexico, but their official name, Estados Unidos Mexicanos. Estados Unidos, I wonder where they got that name from. Very original there. Otherwise, though, Mexico won its independence in 1821, drafted their official constitution, and officially became an entity by 1824, of which obviously Texas was now a part. Texas would no longer be a Spanish possession. Texas would now be a part of Mexico, specifically a region in connection with the current Mexican state of Coahuila, and would be known as Coahuila y Texas. Okay? For those of you not from Texas or those unfamiliar with Texas history, Texas derives its name from an old Caddo Indian word, Tejas, which means friend. And as Caddo Indians encountered Spaniards back in the colonial days, they formed various different partnerships, and the word Tejas was recognized for friend, friendship, if you will. And the name stood. So Tejas would eventually be translated loosely into Spanish, Tejas, Tejas. And in reality, the X in Texas in Old Spanish also has that H sound. So Texas, Texas, is the true actual Old Spanish name. And of course, over the years, it just became Texas. We'll talk about Texas in a little bit. Okay? Well, in 1824, Mexico becomes its own country, of which Texas is a part. And they recognize that they've got a problem. They need to colonize and establish populations all throughout their new country, but especially in Texas. More specifically, because Spain tries to come back into Mexico and to retake Mexico. So as to further, in the 1820s, by the way, like 1829, Spain tries to come back and retake Mexico. They fail, but the point being, Mexico needs to extend its population from central Mexico, around Mexico City, and upwards into the northern territories. Kind of like how the Spaniards saw in the 1700s. They needed to have a buffer against the French, if you will. Mexico had even more foresight. That being said, they went about it in kind of an interesting way. They wanted to populate Texas, and they had an idea that they could attract settlers from the United States. You have the American South immediately east of Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, the Carolinas. By the late 1820s, Mexico had not only fought another war to stave off their former colonial oppressor, but they had now offered land grants to American impresarios to deliver the idea of American settlers coming in to settle lands in Texas under contract with the Mexican government. So an impresario would be a land broker, if you will, who would attract these settlers and establish various different plots of land under commission from the Mexican government. The most notable impresario in Texas history is none other than Stephen F. Austin. Yes, you guessed it. Austin, Texas, our capital, is named after Stephen F. Austin. He was an impresario who obtained several different land grants, most notably Austin's Colony, which is a swath of area extending from Houston northwest into various different parts in and around Brazos County, in and around there, Navasota, modern-day Bryan, College Station, Texas, Hempstead, they're all in there. Okay? And he was to bring 300 American families. And then eventually it would be expanded to there would be more American families that he could attract. Now, the Mexican government said, we would love to have these American families come populate the state of Texas, but they've got to become Catholic and they've got to learn Spanish. Sure, yeah, we'll become Catholics y hablamos español, muy bien. Vamos a entender español. Es tan fácil para aprender. Yeah, muy bien. Right? Sure. Yeah, we'll be Catholic. We love the Virgin Mary. Oh, yes. We'll say our Father and follow it up with Hail Mary and do all kinds of things. Yeah. Yeah, we love a crucifix. Sure. Okay. Did most of the American settlers coming to Texas become Catholic converts? No. Did most of them try and learn Spanish? No. And eventually, more and more American families would come and settle into Texas, that they would more than double the number of population of Tejanos, people of old Spanish and Mexican descent who had lived in Texas as well, especially along the Rio Grande. There would be more Anglo-American settlers in Texas in the early 1830s than Tejanos. Okay. I mentioned 1829 and the Spaniards trying to retake Mexico for a reason. Because in that conflict, a young Mexican, former Spanish military officer, kind of like George Washington, if you will, a former British officer become an American officer, a Mexican military commander, General Santa Anna de Lopez, Santa Anna for short, gained popular notoriety for beating back the Spanish effort to retake Mexico. Sounds kind of like Andrew Jackson. Okay? And Santa Anna gains his notoriety, and just a few short years later, the gentleman Santa Anna would become president of Mexico by 1833. So Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna is now president of Mexico, 1833, largely because he was a war hero. Okay? And he begins to do several different things. He begins to centralize Mexican government. He begins to do that as deemed by Texan settlers in an effort to stem the tide of this American influence now in the Mexican state of Texas. So these Anglo settlers in Texas really kind of start to wonder just exactly what the Mexican government has in mind for them. Okay? Keep in mind, the overwhelming majority of American settlers coming into Texas are from the modern day American South. Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina. You do have a few New Yorkers, a couple from Pennsylvania here and there, but generally speaking, they're from the South. So if you ever wondered how Texans got their Texan accent, it's basically an extension of old Southern accents with its own little twist and twang. That's Texas for you. Okay? So, Santa Anna begins to consolidate power more centrally. Texas settlers really don't like that, and they begin to raise their voices about that. Santa Anna, seeing that in general, decides he's going to force his hand and really flex his muscles, and he personally is going to make his way on up to Texas along with an army of 5,000 federal Mexican troops, by the way, and he's going to silence this conflict, whatever may be going. And of course, you have these American settlers in Texas who understand, oh boy, he's going to try and bring an army to quiet us. Go ahead and try it. So you have these Texian militias, if you will. And of course, I'm conceptualizing the Texas Revolutionary Movement, by the way. Okay? You have all these Texian settlers who promise to defend themselves, promise their way of life. The Mexican government says they're going to do certain other things. Other things are happening. We're not too happy about that. What if we're from a country that declared independence from their colonial oppressor? What if we Texians declared our own independence and we became our own country? And that's exactly what happened in 1836. on March the 2nd, 1836, on the Brazos River near modern day Navasota, Texas, you have a number of various different Texan statesmen who signed a Texas Declaration of Independence from Mexico. So that is why on March the 2nd every year, you'll see various different signs or Facebook posts or anything of the sort. Happy Texas Independence Day. Yes, that is because on March the 2nd, 1836, there was an official Declaration of Independence signed near Navasota, Texas, Washington on the Brazos, as it's often referred. Okay. The Mexican government says, no, senor, no way, Jose. All right. Santa Anna has a military there. He's got a huge regiment of federal Mexican troops. And there are various different rebellions and conflicts that take place all over South Texas, most specifically, first and foremost, at Goliad, where about 400 Texas settler troops, militia, if you will, encountered a large Mexican army under General Fannin, and they were soundly beaten. And 400 Texans lost their lives in that battle. Santa Anna and his army moves on to present-day San Antonio, Texas, where you have roughly 200 Texas settlers that are holed in at the Alamo. Misión San Antonio de Valero is the official name of what we know as the Alamo. One of the first Spanish missions in Texas, built in the 1730s to convert many of the different natives in the area to Catholicism and bring them into Hispanic society. Misión San Antonio de Valero, that's where San Antonio gets its name. That's also where the oil company Valero gets its name, because they're housed in San Antonio. The Alamo is where 200 Texas settlers have holed themselves down. Santa Anna and his roughly 4,000 to 5,000 Mexican troops lay siege to the Alamo, and by the first week of March, March 6th, they encounter the settlers after 2 long weeks of little skirmishes here. They storm the Alamo and kill all 200 settlers. But that became a rallying cry for others desiring independence for Texas. Santa Anna would move eastward towards modern-day Houston. General Sam Houston, a former Tennessee governor, had made his way to Texas and became part of the Texas Settler Militia by the rank of general. And, yes, modern-day Houston bears his name. Okay, thank you. Sam Houston's army, if you will, roughly about 900 or so, they catch the Mexican troops basically taking an afternoon siesta. Folklore has it that Santa Anna was enjoying the company of a young African-American lady. If you've ever heard the song The Yellow Rose of Texas, that is folklorically an ode to that young lady who was entertaining Santa Anna. So Sam Houston's forces caught that Mexican army by storm, wreaked all kinds of havoc, personally captured Santa Anna, forced him to accept Texas independence since he was the president, and he signed off on it and said, yeah, I'll offer you independence if you let me go, and I'll vouch for you guys to the Mexican government and recognize your independence, which the Mexican government says no. But too bad, so sad. Sam Houston becomes a Texan hero. So now what? Texas has independence. So 2 different things have to happen. First and foremost, you've declared independence. You've declared yourself as the Republic of Texas. You are now a sovereign nation. You are your own country. Hopefully, the Texas settlers, as they were, didn't have to be in their own sovereign country for very long. Most of them felt inevitably they would be annexed into the United States, and they would soon try it. The question then becomes, what about all those Tejanos, like my family, who'd been in Texas for the better part of 100 years before Texas had ever declared independence. People who had been in Texas for decades were now kind of foreigners in their new situation. They'd been there long before these Americans had ever been there. Now what? They were now on the outside looking in their own homeland. Remnants of that conflict impact my family to this day. But otherwise, all those Tejanos, they are now foreigners in their own land. Think about that for a second. Within a matter of months, the United States actually tried to approach the U.S. and say, we'd love to, us Republic of Texas, we'd love to become part of the United States. And at the time, President Andrew Jackson said, well, in doing so, could possibly cause a greater conflict with Mexico, between the United States and Mexico. Hold that thought. And also, it would raise a gigantic question about slavery, because many of the American settlers that came to Texas came specifically to grow cotton, and many of them brought slaves to Texas. So Andrew Jackson says, thanks, but no thanks. Hold that thought, because we know the inevitable. How we get there, we'll discuss in a future video.